So this crowd of protesters has just arrived at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office on 47th and Burnside in Northeast Portland. This was the site of quite a brutal protest a couple of weeks ago. Brutal in the way that there was a confrontation between police and protesters for several hours, during which time the protesters maintained pretty good use of protesting tactics that did not include like throwing anything or being aggressive. And eventually the police ended up charging into the protesters at full speed and beating a bunch of people and making several arrests, and then proceeded to push the protesters throughout the streets down Burnside for a couple of hours. It was pretty brutal. And so they are back. About the same size crowd as there was last time at the beginning. Sorry about that. And this is about the exact same way that it went down last time. They had about like 8 to 10 officers just standing in the parking lot for several hours, while protesters stood in Burnside, in the middle of Burnside, at the edge of the driveway, chanting. We are in Northeast Portland, Oregon right now. And the last time that there was an action here a couple weeks ago, what happened was the standoff lasted for several hours. Both sides were very respectful, I would say. Well, I mean, some of the chants can be a little bit disrespectful, I guess you could make the argument for. But, nobody was throwing anything. Nobody was inciting violence against the police or against officers. But at one point, the story that I was told is that a protester started chanting, "No justice, no peace, we will burn the system down." At which point the police LRAD announcement came out that said, "We are aware that protesters are chanting to burn down the building." And everybody looked at each other and laughed because nobody had said that. But again, probably a piece of cop propaganda to justify an incredibly violent reaction to the protesters. Because eventually what happened was all of a sudden they went from 8 officers kind of defending the driveway to all of a sudden there were 30 to 40 officers in the parking lot. And within a matter of minutes, that line of officers was charging into the crowd of protesters very violently, tackled a ton of people, made several arrests. A lot of people got beat up pretty bad.
Black Lives Matter! We do this every night. Stay together, stay tight. We do this every night. Stay together, stay tight. We do this every night. Stay together, stay tight.
This is at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office in Northeast Portland. See, that's harsh. If you can hear what the crowd is chanting. They're chanting, "Nobody likes you, not even your mother." Well, it could be argued that with the constant taunting, a violent response by police is kind of inevitable since they are humans after all. But then again, the argument could be made that police have long been able to kind of brutalize the public at whim, protected by the law and kind of backed by these sort of oppressive ideas of modern policing, like broken windows, policing tactics, and search and frisk and things like that have absolutely been detrimental to the safety and security of many of our Black, brown, and Indigenous residents, as well as just lower class residents in general. The communities that are lacking resources is what I'm trying to say, I don't mean to say lower class. And so I would say that my assessment of what happens here is that you've got a lot of very passionate members of the community that are finally gaining momentum and speaking out against the violence that is inherent in modern policing. And there's been a ton of research coming out lately. There's been a lot of really great articles. The New Yorker just put out a great article a couple of days ago about how the police unions have been fighting against any form of or any sort of reform for the past 50 years, kind of citing that any sort of reforms will make police officers' jobs more dangerous. Despite the fact that police officers have it has its inherent dangers, don't get me wrong, and it's definitely very intense if you're in certain areas that are high in homicides and things like that. But for the most part, police officers, I think they're like the 10th most dangerous job. Like loggers and crab fishermen, fisher folk come in a little bit higher. I think that retail clerks actually have a more dangerous job, if I remember correctly. But so regardless of that, the unions have been fighting against reform, regardless of kind of the human costs that's been taken on communities of color, even though there is plenty of evidence to suggest that, like in that New Yorker article, I believe the figure was that in Chicago, the Chicago PD murder Black folks at an average of 27.6 times more than the white residents. And that's just a massive human toll, a massive inequality. And so on the other side of all of these concerned, passionate citizens that are taking to the streets, you have the police that are, it's their job to sort of uphold the system. And there's so many issues, so many deeply embedded issues that come along with modern policing, like this notion of the blue wall, I think it is, where whistleblowers, officers are actively, told not to testify against other officers. There's this sort of really deep running fraternity aspect to it. And in a lot of places, the police unions, they just have so much power. And also in that New Yorker article, they were mentioning that police unions in cities that have strong union laws, the violence from the police is actually directly attributable to places that have very strong union laws, where the police are more protected by the state unions. And that's a pretty big issue. And that the police violence in other areas that don't have very strong union laws, like in, I believe it was Dallas, where they have several options for unions, including a bunch of black police officer unions and Latinx police officer unions. And they actually have a much more balanced sort of approach to policing, because all of those different unions are able to sign onto the contracts that are made. So it's not just like in New York, for example, the New York Police Department, which I believe it's the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, I think it is the name of the police unit in New York. They're insanely powerful. And they're talking about a police department that has a $6 billion budget and something like 60,000 officers or something absurd like that. So it seems like the police unions, that's really one of the things that needs to come to a compromise with the community at large if any sort of progress is going to be made. At this point, there are plenty of people that are calling for a total abolition of policing, and their viewpoint is justified. It was once an incredibly radical idea, but it's really taken hold especially with the younger generations. It's really kind of lit a fire under a lot of people, and it's a totally valid stance to take. If we want to see real change, if we want to see what we can do to make better our communities and make our communities safer, and take all of the money that goes into militarizing the police and put that into those resources into traditionally underserved communities with education and housing opportunities and healthcare and employment assistance and all that sort of thing, all that sort of stuff. Really, my opinion is that education is where it all starts, and that means taking way better care of our teachers. Oh, Mama Shakes. You got all sorts of jangles going on. Mm-hmm. Nice tambourine on a stitch. Mm-hmm. Nice.
I've grown strangely attached to the cowbell you gave me, to the point where I can't bring it out. I keep picking it up and being no, it's too special.
I don't want to lose you.
But it sounds nicer than what I have. Baker's dozen, was that 13 people? Nice.
Yeah, I'm on download the news right now. Actually, there's been a lot of violence in Portland over the past week. It's been super sad. Actually, really close to where I live, just 10 blocks down from my house. I think they said something like 150 shots were fired. I don't know if anyone was. I think people were injured. I don't know if anybody was killed. But a couple of nights ago, a black trans woman was killed. She was stabbed after a vigil for another homicide victim. Asia Raquel Rhonda Spears, I believe, was her name, and I believe that was on Thursday night or so. And then there were a couple of other shootings over this past week. It's been a really, really intense, really sad week. Been seeing a lot of violence on the streets.
Oh, he's shining back from the roof. It's like my light's brighter. Fuck you.
Yeah, we're at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office in Northeast Portland. They are bringing up the name of Quanice Hayes, who was a young black man, 17 years old, who was shot while he was on his hands and knees and was complying with orders. I'm not sure what the officer's side of that story is to justify his shooting of a man that was on his hands and knees that was complying with orders. But I do know that they have their own version of the story in which the shooting was justified. But again, with things like qualified immunity in place, all an officer has to do is say, well, I feared for my life. And that's all the justification they need to murder somebody, whether or not their life was actually threatened or not. That's why we see so many people that get shot in the back as they're running away. Or why you have a 12-year-old like Tamir Rice who gets murdered in broad daylight because the police think he has a gun. Or why Breonna Taylor, her killers, still have not been brought to justice in the least. Crowds chanting "Defund police, fund schools," and that's where I'm at. That's where my philosophy. That's where I stand very strongly. Is that they put way too much money into militarizing the police. That's really not necessary because their militarization provokes a response from the community, which then provokes a militarized response from the police. It's a pretty stupid cycle.
I know, it's fucking ridiculous. They can spend all the money they want on tear gas.
Chuck, if you've got some insight on how qualified immunity does work, I would be interested to hear it. That's kind of my understanding. I know that that's a pretty simplistic, summary of it. But that is kind of my understanding of it. Yeah, this is the Portland Police Bureau, I believe. I don't believe it's the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office.
I think it's a dual location. You see that sign?
Yeah, it's technically the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, but they do share space. The Portland Police Bureau shares space here. And every time I've been here, I'm pretty sure it's just the Portland Police Bureau that have been holding the line. And I don't really ever see any Multnomah County Sheriff's officers out, despite it being the sheriff's office building, which is interesting.
Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. They matter to you. Black lives matter. Stop killing black people.
Not to my knowledge. I'm actually not familiar with there being a state guard. The National Guard did actually get called in the maybe like sometime in June after a couple of weeks of sustained protests. But Kate Brown, our governor here in Oregon, she made a statement saying that the National Guard was not going to be patrolling the streets, which was correct. I never saw National Guard troops like in the streets like we did in other cities across the country. But they did come to assist the Portland Police Bureau with like logistics and supplies and things like that. And I'm not sure how long how long the National Guard stayed in that role, or if they're still doing that, if they never stopped. There hasn't really been an update on that. Yep, that's your friendly PDX reporter, Robert H.
How many dogs have you killed? Oh, shit.
There's an interesting, I don't know what to call it, I guess proposition from the Portland Police Bureau, or maybe it was from the federal forces, I'm not sure, but a lot of you might be familiar that there was a injunction passed, a temporary restraining order against the federal forces in downtown because they were still assaulting journalists and credentialed journalists and legal observers who do have access to these closure areas despite what the law enforcement officers would like to believe. And recently they've been floating the idea that they want to somehow pass an injunction that would allow only the ACLU to issue proper press credentials. Because there have been a lot of people that are protesting that are like writing press on themselves, or maybe they aren't credentialed press, but they're putting press patches on and writing press and duct tape on their helmets. And so they're trying to make a distinguishment there. But there's a lot of problems inherent with putting one organization in charge of who has access to media. Well, yeah, I personally am happy to see a return to protesting the police without with the federal forces actually withdrawing a little bit the past couple of nights. There's been completely peaceful protests downtown for the past 2 nights, and I'm really happy to see that. And you know, it it was really kind of depressing to see that such a shift, so much of the focus shifted towards the federal occupation and sort of a lot of people that are, you know, rightfully so, pretty angry at Trump's kind of authoritarian-esque moves.
You don't care if people die. That's a lie. You don't care if people die.
But a lot of people were, you know, rightfully so, saying that the focus had been lost on the Black Lives Matter movement, which is inextricably linked to defunding the police and injecting the defunded money into communities of color. Protesters have just advanced a little bit from the road to the sidewalk, so they're right on the edge of the property now. Protesters are at the the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office in Northeast Portland on Burnside and 47th. Yeah, it's true. You know, the people that kind of mess with the fence or maybe throw things or use lasers, you know, offensively, definitely provokes a response from law enforcement. But I think that it's really important to remember that the aggression was escalated on the side of the state forces, really.
This is the Portland Police Bureau.
Yep.
You're being warned to stay out of Southeast Precinct.
Sounds like the LRAD is
Stay off
out.
the property at Southeast Precinct. You could be arrested for trespass and subject to use of force. Do not enter the premise or the grounds of Southeast Precinct. This is the Portland Police Bureau. You're being warned to stay out of Southeast Precinct. Stay off the property at Southeast Precinct. You could be arrested for trespass and subject to use of force. Do not enter the premise or the grounds of Southeast Precinct.
I have to admit, that's actually a much more gentle warning than they usually give. They're pretty much just telling people not to come onto the property or they'll be arrested for trespassing, which is the first time I've heard them put it in that way. You know, they usually just get on and tell people that if they don't disperse, that they're going to be arrested. So it's actually not really telling them to disperse. They're kind of, in that way, facilitating the protest. A notable change.
Do not enter the premise or the grounds of Southeast Precinct.
There's nobody over there. Shut the fuck up.
do believe that's Arex behind me on the megaphone. No, that's the thing. It was never about the feds, despite what national media wanted to paint it as. And as much as that was a constitutional crisis, federal aggression versus states' rights and things like that, this movement has always been about defunding the police to create a safer, more equitable community, more equitable society for our Black, brown, and indigenous communities. What up, Devin? Yeah, we're at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office on Burnside.
Fascist cops are going down! 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 Fascist cops are going down!
No, this is the Portland Police Bureau. I don't think the building's being attacked at all. I think that this is a peaceful protest. But this is the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office in Northeast Portland. Always need medics. Well, unfortunately, the sad reality is that even though it might be a small percentage of officers that are very violent and should not hold a badge and should not hold authority over any human, and are willing to murder indiscriminately and maybe have veins of racism running through them, or not maybe, but definitely. Despite that being a smaller percentile, the rest of the police force is such a tight-knit fraternity organization protected by the police unions, and they're not really able to anytime there are whistleblowers to try and root out corruption or root out violence against the community, the whistleblowers more often than not end up getting punished and fired or ridiculed, and or eventually just become so disillusioned with the system that they quit, and then the rest of the police officers stay silent. And so what we see is all of these attempts at reform to try and change these deeply rooted issues with modern policing have failed outright because of the power of the police unions and because they've been able to shut down any type of reform over the past 50 years.
How's it going? How are you? Okay.
Copy that. Excuse me. Yep. Coming out. We're getting kicked off. Oh,
What the fuck? I mean, where the hell are we supposed to go?
Everybody just came backwards.
Did you understand? I mean, they want us to go over there on the.
I think this is fine.
oh, all right. People are officially throwing
I
things.
think that was just a suggestion.
So, first act of aggression, I guess, would be from the protesters. Thanks, Alicia. I'm just a guy that stays up late at night reading all sorts of things. There's a really great article that just came out in the New Yorker that I read today. It's a long one. It took me like it was like a half-hour read, but it really went in depth into the deep issues with how much control the police unions have, how they've been able to block reforms, what it's meant for the communities in New York and elsewhere in places like Chicago. Right, but so this is a good point to make, right? Is that so somebody threw like an apple or something, right? And so that's an act of aggression, and it does kind of break the peaceful protest line. I would argue that still makes it a non-violent protest, but here's the thing. I mean, a lot of times the argument is like, well, you can't blame the entirety of the police force for the actions of like the 10% or whatever that commit acts of atrocity against our communities. But the same people that say that are all too ready to say, well, this whole protest is no longer peaceful and it's violent because of the action of one person throwing an apple. And that's just blatant hypocrisy.
Who killed him? BPB. What's his name? Funny Face. Who killed him? BPB. What's his name? Funny Face.
Yeah, definitely not a riot. I mean, one apple getting thrown. I would argue that fruit has a long and illustrious history of being used in forms of protest for thousands of years. You might even say it's one of our oldest pastimes as humans.
Who killed her? BPB. What's her name? Kendra James. Who killed her? BPB. What's her name? Kendra James. Who killed her?
And it looks like the people that bring out the protest projectors are out. I'm gonna go to the other side. Yeah, I have a legitimate press pass. And I've been very careful to kind of learn my role as someone has a legitimate press pass, meaning that I do my best not to yell or anything or engage in a protest action at all. I'm really just trying to document and inform. I have gotten shot by munitions a couple of times, and I've lost my cool in those moments. But you know, it kind of angers me when I get injured in such a way. Especially when I have a clearly marked press pass and I'm getting targeted and shot at and there's nobody around me. That was by the feds, though, last week. Oops. Yeah, it's issued by the Secretary of State of Oregon through a nonprofit organization I'm working with called Grassroots Activist International Association. Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting that right now there's a push by law enforcement here to kind of pass an injunction that would make it so that the only people that can issue legitimate press passes to cover the protests would be the ACLU. And so while I am a big fan of the ACLU's work, there's kind of just some very large inherent issues with putting the power of media, like who's credentialed media, into one organization. That just has really poor implications for the freedom of the press. I talked to another independent journalist earlier tonight, Corey Elia. I just was asking him if he thought it had any teeth and if he thought it would go anywhere, and his answer was probably absolutely not, which is what I would believe too. I just haven't had time to like look into the legal ins and outs. Well, it's now officially an unlawful assembly, and somebody threw another apple. So yeah, that was the apple of doom. One apple equals an unlawful assembly. Oh, somebody threw a water bottle. So yeah, you know, it's really hard to say. Like, I still at the end of the day will say that the state violence is the original aggressor of violence, and that the community coming out passionately to protest against it is a reaction to state violence, and that throwing water bottles and apples at fully armored soldiers is like not really, I mean, you know, not really anything compared to murdering people in the streets, right? I understand that that's a matter of content for a lot of people and a matter of disagreement. But yeah, as soon as the LRAD comes out, that always sets protesters off. And now that it's been declared an unlawful assembly, I feel like I need to put my helmet on and stuff. I was really hoping I didn't have to do that. There's also the possibility that there was a lot of talk at the meeting before the park to disperse like water and to really use the be like water philosophy that was learned from the Hong Kong protesters when the time was right. And so there's a total possibility that protesters may disperse, but you know, there's always protesters that are like into the fight, if you know what I mean, and do want to poke the bear. I think there's a bunch of police over on the east side of the building. Hey, buddy. Uh-oh. And here we go. Police are confronting the group of protesters, and so this is where things get ugly. Somebody's playing the Imperial Death March, as seems to be the tradition now whenever law enforcement begins advancing. How's it going? Oh, looks like we... Yeah, there's actually a really good article that came out too, with some research that studied the long and illustrious history. Oh, there we go. They're making arrests over there.
Continue moving west. Continue moving west. Move west down Burnside. Continue moving west. Continue moving west. Move west down Burnside.
I think they might have maced this young girl.
Continue moving west. Continue moving west. Move west down Burnside. Continue moving west. Continue moving west. Move west down Burnside. This is an unlawful assembly. You need to move west. You are subject to arrest or use of force. Move west now.
On the sidewalk, do not come up from behind the officers.
This is an unlawful assembly. You need to move west. You are subject to arrest or use of force. Move west now.
The crowd just moved like water, I would say, to the south, onto 44th.
Go! Keep moving! Move!
I think that they just, some press, please. Thank you, don't touch me. I think they just popped somebody's tires again, which is an interesting tactic that they love to use.
Move! You guys need to keep walking, please. Hold up! Guys, let's go, come on.
Disperse from the area. This is an unlawful assembly. Leave the area now to the south or to the west.
Stay on the sidewalk.
Sorry it's so dark, y'all. We're in a dark neighborhood.
Chased by cops.
Everyone's just getting chased by cops down this street.
We're moving. You can't see. We're moving. We're moving.
Disperse from the area. This is an unlawful assembly. Leave the area now to the south or to the west.
Get out of here. Go now. Don't even get pushed. Go. Get out.
You're held to an injunction against the press.
Just stay out of my way.
Oh, hey. Right behind you, right behind you.
Get out of here.
There's a lot of people that are blinded by mace that are being shoved by police as if they can see in a dark neighborhood. They just shoved a person with a bicycle. Constant abuse. Member of the press, please. Being shoved again.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Jesus.
Federal restraining order against press. Clearly marked.
Stop your car!
I'm gonna cross the street this rider.
Copy. This motorist just looks like a middle-aged resident, but she's getting yelled at, or they're getting yelled at. We're at 41st and I don't know what, 41st and I didn't hear that the temporary restraining order was lifted. If you've got a source on that, I'd like to see it. The law enforcement agents were... Oh, a firework just went off on Burnside, it looked like. Law enforcement was attempting, or is asking for the TRO to be removed. Yeah, you can see my pass. Hold on.
We'll see you soon, motherfuckers!
All right, and it looks like that police push is over. Oh, I guess it was a temporary restraining order, wasn't it? Oh, I didn't know that. But, you know, there shouldn't have to be an injunction against the law enforcement to protect members of the press. It's ridiculous that had to happen in the first place. That's a blatant assault on our First Amendment. Ooh. Well, that was once again very violent. I would say that's a lot more violent than a couple of apples getting tossed. Protesters have regathered themselves on the corner of Oak and 41st. And, yeah. I think that the protesters actually did a very good job of dispersing like water, in my opinion. I didn't see anyone getting arrested. I'm not sure if anyone did. I definitely saw tons of people getting shoved, just like thrown to the ground. You know, once the police start marching through the streets, and again, this is one of the big issues. Yeah, a couple of people threw a water bottle and a couple apples. But once that happens, then the police start marching through the street. They'll literally throw anyone and everyone that's in their way to the ground. They'll beat the shit out of people. They'll mace people. Just if they feel like it. And since this is sustained protests against police brutality, the officers are understandably really pissed off. But this, again, is a protest against police brutality in support of Black Lives Matters, you know? So that's just like this constant running ridiculous hypocrisy. I don't know if it's a hypocrisy, but it is ridiculous. I mean, I don't know how many people I just saw. There was like a young lady that was like clearly not here to incite a riot. She was dressed in like shorts and a tank top, and she got maced because she couldn't move fast enough. She tripped over her bike, so she tripped over somebody's bike and then got maced. People were leading other people that had been maced through these dark streets. They were getting shoved by police because they weren't moving fast enough, as the person is literally being led by the hand, completely blinded and probably in a world of pain because mace sucks. That's the sort of brutality that, that's why you have people in the streets protesting, because that's what the militarized modern police force of America is capable of and is more than willing to do against its citizens. It's a sad state of affairs. Anyways, I'm going to sign off for now. I'm going to regroup myself. I'm going to find my friend that's on the ground here, make sure she's okay. And stay safe, everybody. Cheers.